welcome Kiersten Todt to the stage. She is the Chief of Staff of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is really CISA, where she is spearheading the planning, allocation of resources, and development of long-range objectives in the support of CISA's goals. She has a very important job and responsible for providing strategic vision and direction to enable and empower CISA's workforce. Prior to her role at CISA, Kiersten served as a managing director of Cyber Readiness Institute, CRI, which is a non-for-profit that she co-founded with the CEO of MasterCard. With MasterCard, Microsoft, PSP Partners, and the Center for Global Enterprise. And she was the CEO of Liberty Group Ventures. Kiersten has been very, very busy. She most recently served as the federal government as the executive director of President Obama's independent bipartisan commission on enhancing national cybersecurity. So at this time, please welcome Kiersten to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary Beth, and thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks to both of you for hosting this event. It sounds like yesterday was great. I was able to check in on it. And when you talk about these topics, it's the greatest hits in cyber, everything from ransomware to misinformation, disinformation, to human behavior, to the great work that's being done in outer space and how that's connecting to what we're doing. So it's a real pleasure to be a part of this discussion today. And I appreciate what you're talking about when we look at the theme of uniting women in cyber. Thank you for your commitment to this issue, because I'll talk a little bit about the workforce. But the issue here is that if we are truly going to get at cybersecurity, and you've talked about this with human behavior yesterday, and I know conversations today will touch on it as well, we have to represent all of society because this is an issue that is interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. It requires the thinking of all of us. And particularly encouraging women to get into this space is a great opportunity. As Mary Beth, as you just said, I recently joined CISA. I'm in week 3 of this agency. I used to say I was a recovering bureaucrat because I had been in government in the White House and in the Senate, and now I'm back. And I will tell you what has struck me so much in these just few weeks since I've started about this mission for CISA is the level of interest, engagement, enthusiasm for the mission that's here. This is a team that chooses to be here. It's a very mission-focused team. And it's particularly interesting to me because back in 2001, I was working in the Senate for the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee before it was the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. And I'd been working for Senator Lieberman on his personal staff. I'm from Connecticut. And in that summer, Senator Jeffords, a Republican senator from Vermont, switched to an independent, and the whole Senate flipped from a Republican majority to a Democratic majority. And so in the summer, I ended up working on the committee, and my first assignment was a hearing on critical infrastructure protection, scheduled for September 12, 2001. So 9/11 happened on that Tuesday, and we were the only hearing to move forward on that Wednesday. And it was in that hearing that Senator Lieberman turned to those of us that were staffing him and said, we need to have a Department of Homeland Security. That sounds like it might have been a logical next step at the time, but those were words that we weren't even putting together. Homeland, it was long before the show came about. It was a communist term, but it was something that I ended up working on for a year. And specifically, I worked on the Directorate for Infrastructure Protection for Cybersecurity for R&D, Emergency Preparedness and Response. So when I think about that work in 2001 and 2002, and to be here 19 years later, the legislation was passed in November of 2002, is a real honor. And it helps me to understand the evolution of this issue. Because I say that because from a situational awareness perspective, we hear it a lot right now in cybersecurity. Every time there's a new threat, every time there's an event, we're at an important point. But I will tell you that we truly are at a unique time in history. We are at an inflection point when it comes to cybersecurity. We have congressional support for this issue, industry support, the trust of the nation and of the population, which is really at the core of what we do, because we're all aware of what the threat is. We have felt it personally. I think one of the striking elements of this year was that individuals, citizens, felt cybersecurity personally, arguably for the first time. We've probably all had fraud on our credit cards. We've had different issues. But I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so when you read about Colonial Pipeline and the next day there are lines that stretch 3 blocks down for gas, it is this real impact. What was fascinating to me about Colonial Pipeline too was that We didn't even have a shortage of gas, but that fear and that psychology, because we didn't know what was going on, led to this reaction by multiple communities. The JBS meatpacking supply issue was also another place where we felt this personally. So right now, CISA as an agency has the authority to address cybersecurity as a national security priority. And for those of us that have been working on cyber for many, many years, this is a great opportunity to truly understand and help and have impact on how to make cybersecurity better, how to make our infrastructure, our industry, our government more secure. So what is CISA? CISA is the operational lead for .gov, essentially for how to secure government. When we look at all of the agencies, CISA is responsible for making sure that these agencies are secure. It's also the national coordinator for critical infrastructure, resilience, and security. And what's important about this agency right now, more than it's ever been, it's only 3 years old in November, is that CISA is operational. So when there's an event, industry or government, CISA gets in the trenches to help to mitigate and recover. And it's part of the federal response team. It helps to mitigate risk by looking across landscapes. It can help mitigate risk to infrastructure. And this is important because one of the things that I've learned even in the time that I've been here is something that I knew, but to see it actually operationalized is we have regional offices all over the country. And what's important about that is when we talk about cybersecurity at a federal level, it is a bit abstract. It doesn't hit you in the community, but I can tell you firsthand that there are cybersecurity experts, there are physical security experts, all part of this agency that are on the ground throughout the country, and they are acting on a daily basis to protect the nation. But importantly, as we look at all of these pieces, I talk about CISA being the operational lead, the coordinator. CISA is an agency that's built for collaboration and partnership. It doesn't work on its own. We often used to say in crisis management when we were responding to major events that industry and government can't do this alone. We have to work together. And in cybersecurity, that couldn't be more true. CISA is an influence organization, and it's deliberately designed to work across industry and government with the state, local, tribal, and territorial partners to improve security and resilience of our infrastructure. And it's an agile organization that really fosters operational collaboration to support information enabling. And this is important because for those of us that have been in this space, I was talking to CISO earlier today. We talk a lot about the cyber jargon, the words that feel abstract, or the phrases that we've used for so long that they lose their meaning. Public-private partnership is one of them. It's really true, but what do we do to operationalize that partnership? How do we engage to make sure that that's a mutually enforcing and a mutual partnership to actually to make action and to create change? The other piece of this is it's not just sharing of information, but how do we take the information to enable action? When we talk about cyber right now, we can often be paralyzed by all of the threats and the issues that are out there. But what's important is how do you move forward with action? And as we look to this new administration, and CISA is extremely fortunate to have a tremendous director at its helm, Jen Easterly, whose history and her background and experience couldn't be more perfect for this job and to lead this agency into the future and to where it's going. And so we look at our 3 priorities. And the first is internal. We've got to build and retain a skilled and diverse workforce. We've got to be able to have the infrastructure with people. We know that at its core, cyber is a people issue. And we've got to start by creating this agency that has this workforce. And ultimately, what we want is for CISA to be the model, not just for government, but for industry, for nonprofits, for academia, and how to build out that workforce. Because cyber, and you'll hear me say this a couple times, it's an interdisciplinary problem which requires diversity in order to solve and build the solutions. That's racial diversity, gender diversity, cultural, accessibility diversity, neurodiversity. We need individuals from all walks of life, so economic, socioeconomic, cultural, to come together. Because what's important when we look at these issues, there's a book by the individual who is running Pixar, Ed Catmull, who talks a lot about building innovation in workforces. And what he says is you can have a mediocre issue with a great workforce, or you can have a great issue with a mediocre workforce. And as long as your workforce is great, it will always make whatever issue you're dealing with, whatever task in front of you, it will make it great. And that is so true when it comes to cybersecurity, because the challenges, the issues, all of those that come forward can be very multifaceted, can be complex. And you've got to have the right people that are looking at these issues with different levels of experience. Cybersecurity is not just a science and math problem. It's historical. We need individuals with sociology backgrounds, with psychology backgrounds, history, politics. And this really requires everybody coming together to build those solutions. So how do we recruit this workforce? Typically, when we look at recruiting, we go to the same sources. But what CISA is really focusing on right now is going to other places. We're just announcing a partnership with Girls Who Code. We're looking at community colleges, associations, different parts of our nation that have individuals who are understanding this issue and want to be a part of it. We're also looking at reskilling. So for those of you who are out there and doing this work or doing work that's very different, but you feel like you have an aptitude, there's an opportunity to be trained and educated in how to be part of the cyber workforce. And one of the things that Jen Easterly, the director of CISA, is really focused on is the workforce ecosystem. Everything from recruiting and hiring, onboarding, training, professional development, mentoring, leadership training, succession, mobility within the organization, meaning doing different stints across the organization and within the federal cyber ecosystem. How do you prepare for a promotion and getting that 360-degree feedback? So when we talk about workforce, this is truly about an infrastructure development. One of the things that Director Easterly has said, which I really like, is how judgment is critical infrastructure. When we think about how we're building out these issues, it starts with people. And we talk a lot about a strong workforce and the cultural issues, and this is about training and education. And we use the phrase, Director Easterly uses the phrase K through gray. It's about educating individuals at a young age, but all the way through our senior citizens and how to reskill. The second element and the second priority looks at CISA internally within government. As an agency, we have to build trust across the federal government. If this were part of your trivia for today, I would ask people if they know how many agencies there are in the federal government. I had worked for many years. I didn't know the answer to this. It's 102. So CISA has to partner with 102 agencies, and it starts by being a trusted partner, by recognizing that we're all going to work collaboratively. Chris Inglis, who's the National Cyber Director and a tremendous partner to CISA, often talks about trust and what we need from each other. And he says on an international stage, in order to beat one of us, you have to beat all of us. And that is also true internally. As a nation, as a set of agencies, in order to do anything, we have to work together. We are a unit, and we want to make that partnership, that engagement unassailable. The third priority for CISA is how we work externally to industry. We have to build resilience to manage risk. And this is really about pre-event collaboration. As a nation, as government, we're often quite good at response. When something happens, a hurricane, a natural disaster, or a man-made disaster, we bring all resources to bear to respond. But what's really important when we talk about resilience is that pre-event work. How do we come together, industry and government, to make sure that we understand how security operates so that when something does happen, we're not going to disrupt operations, that we are able to reduce risk to physical and digital infrastructure by working together before an event. We often hear the term left of boom. It's the idea that we're doing everything we can to protect, but we're not doing it with the idea that we're going to prevent everything. It's the very strong understanding that things will happen, but our role is to make sure that whatever does happen, it doesn't take down operations, it doesn't disrupt. So as CISA looks to industry, we are looking at engaging industry with partnerships and collaborations. And one of the seminal programs that was just announced in August is the JCDC, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. The objective of this is to work with companies to drive down risk to critical infrastructure. If we think back to what happened in SolarWinds, and there's been a lot of discussion, SolarWinds was really a visibility issue. The government couldn't see what was on the critical infrastructure networks. And for those of you who have been in this space, you hear the statistic all the time, 85% of critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. Now, we don't want the US government to operate on privately owned networks. But by partnering with industry through this JCDC, we can have visibility to what is on the networks to collaborate with industry to secure critical infrastructure. We just want to see what the companies that have the best and brightest technologies are seeing. Right now, we have 15 plank holders, And their partnership has been tremendous in just a short period of time. There's a lot of interest in the work of the JCDC by industry, and there are going to be a lot of other opportunities for engagement. Another element as we look at what we're doing is to focus on supply chain. What happened with the pandemic and work from home is that security risks emanated from far beyond the network boundary. That the pandemic created this seismic shift with work from home. So in an almost overnight situation, the edge of every company's network went from desks in an office to kitchen tables. And there was obviously an explosion of bring your own devices. The attack surface increased, but really when we think about it, this has been a reality ever since the Internet of Things, because as we started to see digital interdependencies, that meant that our infrastructure, what was critical, was now being connected to what wasn't critical. In 2013 and 2014, I worked with the National Institute of Standards and Technology on the development of the NIST Voluntary Cybersecurity Framework. And that was very much about a voluntary framework for critical infrastructure. And we were all adamant that this was not about the mom and pop pizza shop on the corner. Fast forward a couple of years when I was executive director of President Obama's Commission on Cybersecurity. And one of the commissioners was the CEO of MasterCard, Ajay Banga. And what he talked about was, in fact, these interdependencies. And at that point, it actually was about the mom and pop pizza shop on the corner, because if they were using an iPad or if they were using Square, the connectivity of those brick and mortar stores to the banking sector, to others, was in the first degree. And it was this recognition that if we are truly to secure our infrastructure, we have to pay attention to all elements of the supply chain, and particularly small businesses. I just came from running a nonprofit, as Mary Beth mentioned, called the Cyber Readiness Institute. And what we focused on there was the security of small businesses, because they are often the weak links in global supply chains. And the interdependencies mean that large companies don't have the ability to shut them out, that we have a shared responsibility to be vigilant in our attention to all of the elements of these supply chains. So as we look to these issues, we have to focus on supply chain security, understanding all of the elements. CISA is leading a national effort to drive strong security controls around these vendors. And as was directed by the May executive order, CISA has worked with NIST to identify categories of service providers that can present critical dependencies for your networks. So it's really about how do we secure these issues. I hope in the Q&A we can perhaps talk a little bit about ransomware, because this is, it absolutely requires a whole of government approach and a whole of nation action to be successful. So as we look to where we are today in October, a Cybersecurity Awareness Month, I have a call to action for all of you. First of all, log on to the CISA Summit, the Cybersecurity Summit. It's going to be every Wednesday this month, and it goes from 12 to 2. The first week, this week, is focusing on vulnerability management ecosystem, very much about supply chain. And the overall theme is Be Cyber Smart. In the second week, we're looking at collective defense. And the third week, we're looking at the workforce. And in the fourth, it's about the power of partnership. This month, CISA's taking this as an opportunity to truly highlight what every individual can do to be cyber ready and cyber secure. As I said earlier, cybersecurity is really about human behavior. At the end of the day, it's what each individual can do to be more secure. All the technology in the world, while security is an engineering problem, the solutions lie in the behavior of individuals. So we look at what can humans do, what can everybody do. It's not meant to be out of fear, but much more out of empowerment. So software updates, updating your software. Think before you click, pay attention to phishing emails, use strong authentication. And CISA is really putting forth this month multi-factor authentication. Statistics show that you're 99% less likely to get hacked if you use multi-factor authentication. I spoke with a global CISO a few days ago who said his security dream is to eliminate single-factor authentication by 2025. That's an aspirational and it's a very important goal, because what we have to do is make security a priority. There has to be a demand for security. I would also encourage you to join our team. As I mentioned, Director Easterly's mission is to make CISA the world's premier cyber and infrastructure defense agency and the place to work for our nation's best cyber defenders. And I'm here to support her vision. And as I mentioned, it's not just about science and technology. We need people who understand human behavior, who have the aptitude and the interest to make all of this work. So when we think about how you can help, you can work with your community, you can work when building relationships with your high school, use your voice to encourage resourcing in your company or wherever you work for cybersecurity at all levels. And through your employees, you can be an advocate. there are lots of examples and there are countless ways that you can join CISA to strengthen the national cybersecurity ecosystem. And through partners like you, we can have a strong, diverse workforce that pushes cyber forward. If you're interested in cybersecurity, there's a role for you. I really encourage you, everybody that's listening today and across all of the sectors and everywhere where people are, to believe in your abilities, your capabilities, your aptitudes. Seize this opportunity to make a difference, to have an impact, and to be a part of the future. Thank you again, Mary Beth and Elizabeth, for doing what you're doing, for this tremendous program, for uniting women and many others around this issue. And I'll turn it back over to Mary Beth for question and answer.
Thank you, Kiersten. That was awesome. A holistic view of what you have done in 3 weeks to join and get up.
It's not me. As Jen says, cyber's a team sport.
Yes, it definitely
and I'm just
is.
joining. I'm the rookie.
So with that, we have lots of questions, but I think you said something about ransomware. So I want to address that. You know, I've read the ransomware task force report. It was really good. How are you guys thinking? I mean, I have questions yesterday from my day job about FinCEN and, you know, what we have to report as when we do incident response, because I have a company that I consult with. And so those are, you know, there's a lot of gray area, a lot of cowboy in ransomware, having done extortion and ransomware cases over the last 10 years. And so it plays out in really every, you know, piece of someone's business. But, you know, you bring together, you know, a breach coach and you bring together a team. But, you know, what does CISA see as their role in helping, you know, to help people understand how do they report, what do they do, and how do they react?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Mary Beth, because this is really, this is a long-term issue. And in the near term, there is a website that CISA has, stopransomware.gov, which has basic approaches for what you can do to prevent ransomware and also what to do when something does happen. And that's first and foremost. The thing to remember is that ransomware is an authentication issue. Malicious actors get into the networks because they have access. So one of the things that you can do to prevent ransomware isn't just backing up your data, but that is critical, but making sure that you have strong authentication. I think one of the challenging elements about Colonial Pipeline is that the malicious actor wasn't choosing Colonial Pipeline because they were infrastructure. They chose Colonial Pipeline because they were an easy entry point, because they weren't using multi-factor authentication. They hadn't updated, patched the software for Microsoft Exchange that had been publicly distributed earlier in the year. So when you think about ransomware, it's what can you do to prevent? And then if you are a victim to ransomware, the big element here is to work with government. There has been a tremendous industry that has been created by ransomware. To your point, right now, you know, insurance companies pay for ransom negotiation. They often cover ransom. We have to do a better job to work with industries to be able to eliminate the threat and then to ensure that we're not creating an industry off of this malicious behavior. But I think it really comes down to preventing it and knowing what to do when something does happen, which is to bring in authorities to help respond appropriately.
Thank you. So with that, so that sounds like we all have to get more educated, right? We have to start this education at the grassroots with the small, medium enterprise, with the consumer, and with folks within the government that are working with all of us in the private sector. So tell us how you'd work with the Cyber Guild, who is a nonprofit that is promoting reskilling. And, you know, we're working with the state of Virginia to look at how do we create more workforce. So if you give us the model of how you're working with Girls Who Code, how would you work with folks like us? Because we have a lot of people in our audience that would probably like to know that, because they're looking for those answers to get into cybersecurity.
So one of my key goals is to work with nonprofits to be able to create a repository within CISA for nonprofit efforts so that we can build out these partnerships for workforce. Having come from the nonprofit sector with a nonprofit organization that was very focused on human behavior for small businesses and working in collaboration with these other nonprofits like Cyber Guild that are working on workforce development and recruiting, that we understand that all of these organizations out there deserve a platform where we can position the work that they're doing. So what CISA is looking to do is to create this repository, this consortium of nonprofits that we can come together and then be able to identify specific partnership opportunities.
Oh, that's great. And then taking that into sort of what we just talked about, but taking it down a layer to the primary and secondary school levels. There's a lot of, I had a breach coach tell me a story where there was a school that had been having ransomware, and they started to extort the parents of the school, saying that if you don't make the school pay the ransomware, we're going to start going after you. So if you think about it, there's a whole education process. So everyone's on a tablet, everyone's online. How do you work with the primary and secondary school levels?
I think it's one of the biggest issues, because when we think about creating a workforce, it goes to how you create culture. When kids are young, they want to be construction workers, doctors, and teachers because that is their universe. And we think about how do we bring this into young primary and secondary schools. And so I also believe that, as we use tablets for kids to learn how to read, as soon as they have a tablet in their hand, the appropriate education is around. My generation didn't grow up very big on recycling. My kids' generation recycles all the time. And so it's this interesting cultural phenomenon because that's all that they know. It's similar to seatbelts. If you grew up not using seatbelts, it's a much harder adaptation. But if you grew up with where seatbelts were just a part of this, then this is how you create the culture. And so working with the schools, and CISA has tremendous programs, education programs on school safety, but also on school cybersecurity, where it works across these regions. I think one of the treasures of CISA are these regional offices, because at the end of the day, you've got to get into the community and be able to integrate these concepts, these ideas to the schools, to the community, so that you can build out the cultures.
Great. And so does that mean that you would be working closer with InfraGard and the FBI and the DoD, and how do you integrate that? And how do you integrate programs like the InfraGard? Because, I've been part of that for a long time, but, we need to bring that together so they can come downstream to the primary and secondary schools and, work with PTAs and work with universities and kind of get that sort of, like you said, that ecosystem built.
I mentioned how cyber is a team sport. This is what Director Easterly talks a lot about. And part of that is the federal team. So we work with DoD, DOJ, Cybercom, NSA, all of the agencies, both at the local level as well as at the federal level, because nobody has pride of authorship here. This is a collaboration. I mentioned the National Cyber Director talking about trust and partnership. And he said these partnerships, as I mentioned, have to be unassailable, that they're never doubted. And I think when you're looking at the community level and all of the great work that's being done by first responders and by others at the community level, it has to be a partnership.
Well, Kiersten, thank you very much. And we're so glad that you're willing to work with us out here in the non-for-profit land of cyber, because it does take a village, and we're here. That's the reason we're here. That's the reason we started the Cyber Guild and United Women in Cyber. So we're so grateful to have you, and we hope to have you back. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Mary Beth, and thanks, Elizabeth. Good luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you.